Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something powerful tonight. The one thing that hurts avoidance more than rejection isn't being turned down or left behind. It's realizing they were the ones who built the walls that kept love out. You see, people who avoid emotions don't do it because they don't care. They do it because they care too much. And they don't know how to handle the weight of those feelings. They've been hurt before. Maybe someone they trusted shattered their faith. Maybe life taught them that opening up equals getting broken. So instead of being rejected by others, they reject the feeling itself. They stay distant, they keep it cool, but deep inside, that coldness burns hotter than any heartbreak. Avoidance fear emotional vulnerability more than rejection. And that's a truth that runs deep within their hearts. You see, rejection is something they can handle. It's external. It's something they can see, name, and distance themselves from. But emotional vulnerability, that's internal. It means opening up the parts of themselves they've worked their whole lives to protect. When an avoidant person starts to feel emotionally exposed, it's like standing in the middle of a storm without shelter. They don't know how to process it, they don't know how to respond, and they sure don't know how to let someone else see them in that raw, unguarded state. It's not that they don't want to be close. They just fear that closeness will break them. This fear of vulnerability usually comes from past pain, betrayal, abandonment, or growing up in an environment where emotions weren't safe. Somewhere along the line, they learned that showing emotion led to disappointment or loss, so they built walls. They became independent, strong, and self-reliant. To the outside world, that looks admirable. They seem like they've got it all together. But deep down, that independence is just a disguise for fear. It's easier for them to control situations when they keep their emotions out of it. When they feel someone getting close, alarm bells go off in their mind. They start thinking, if I open up, they'll see my weaknesses. If I care too much, I'll get hurt again. So instead of taking the risk, they retreat into silence, convincing themselves they're better off alone. But emotional vulnerability isn't about weakness. It's about strength. It's about being brave enough to say, this is who I am, even when it's scary. Avoidants don't see that at first. To them, vulnerability feels like handing someone a weapon and hoping they won't use it. And because they fear that loss of control, they end up avoiding the very thing that could bring them peace. They might love deeply but express it quietly. They might miss someone terribly but never reach out. They'll replay conversations in their head, wishing they could have said more, but their fear keeps their mouth shut. That inner conflict eats away at them more than any rejection could. When they finally realize that emotional vulnerability isn't the enemy but the bridge to connection, something changes. Until then, though, they live in a loop of protection and regret. They protect themselves so fiercely that they end up hurting themselves even more. They think they're avoiding pain, but what they're really avoiding is healing. Because no relationship, no friendship, no love, no genuine bond can exist without emotional openness. Rejection is temporary. Vulnerability, once embraced, builds something lasting. But until they see that truth, they'll keep running, not from others, but from their own hearts. And the longer they run, the heavier that fear becomes, until one day they realize that the walls they built to stay safe also became their prison. Their silence often hides deep emotional conflict, a storm that rages behind calm expressions and controlled behavior. People look at avoidance and assume they're cold, detached, or uninterested, but that's far from the truth. Inside them is a constant battle between wanting to connect and fearing what that connection might cost. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's protection. It's their way of managing emotions that feel too overwhelming to express. When someone asks them what's wrong, they'll say, "I'm fine," not because they are, but because putting their feelings into words feels impossible. They've spent years training themselves not to show too much, not to depend too much, and not to need anyone too deeply. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they feel too much and have no safe way to release it. Every time an avoidant falls silent, there's a story behind it. It might be a memory of being dismissed when they tried to open up, or the fear that expressing their emotions will lead to rejection or ridicule. So instead of talking about what hurts, they swallow their words. They convince themselves that staying quiet is safer than risking misunderstanding. But that silence is heavy. It carries all the things they wish they could say, all the emotions they've buried deep down, and all the love they're afraid to show. Their quietness often gets mistaken for disinterest, and that misunderstanding hurts even more. Because deep inside, they're screaming for someone to notice, for someone to stay patient long enough to see that their silence is not distance, it's fear. They live with a constant push and pull. One moment they want to reach out, to be close, to let someone in. The next they pull away because closeness feels like danger. This back and forth dance confuses not only the people who care about them, but also themselves. They don't want to hurt anyone, yet they often do, by withdrawing, by shutting down, by giving the cold shoulder when all they really want is warmth. They hate this about themselves, but they don't know how to change it. They think staying silent keeps them in control, but that silence ends up controlling them. It becomes a wall between them and the people they love, a wall built not out of anger, but out of fear of being misunderstood or left behind. Sometimes that silence becomes their comfort zone. They start believing that no one can truly understand them, that opening up will only end in pain. So they smile when they're breaking, they joke when they're hurting, and they act strong when they feel weak. The truth is, they crave someone who sees past that mask, someone who doesn't demand words but understands their pauses, their distance, their hesitation. Their silence hides a heart that feels deeply but doesn't know how to be heard. And until they learn that expressing pain doesn't mean weakness, they'll keep fighting that silent war, trapped between their need for love and their fear of it. They crave love but fear losing control, and that's what keeps them trapped in a painful emotional cycle. Avoidants want love as much as anyone else, maybe even more, but the idea of surrendering control terrifies them. Love to them means vulnerability. It means letting someone close enough to see their insecurities, their fears, their flaws, and that closeness feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no guarantee of safety. They've built their sense of strength on independence, on not needing anyone to make them feel whole, but love challenges that belief. It asks them to trust, to rely, to open up. And that goes against everything they've taught themselves to do. Deep down, they long to be understood, to be held, to be seen for who they truly are. But their fear whispers that if they give someone that power, they'll lose themselves in the process. This fear often shows up in subtle ways. They'll fall in love but act like they don't care. They'll crave closeness but create distance. They'll test how much the other person can take before walking away. It's not manipulation, it's protection. Because in their mind, if they stay in control, they can't be hurt. If they pull back first, they won't have to feel abandoned. They believe that love means losing freedom, that attachment means surrendering their power. So they build invisible boundaries, letting people in only so far. The moment things start feeling too real, too intense, they retreat. They might stop calling, stop replying, or distract themselves with work, friends, or hobbies. Anything that keeps their emotions at a safe distance. But here's the truth. That control they fight so hard to maintain is an illusion. Love doesn't take away control, it teaches balance. Yet for the avoidant, the fear runs deeper than logic. It's tied to the belief that depending on someone makes them weak. Maybe they grew up watching people lose themselves in love, or maybe they once gave their heart fully and were left shattered. Whatever the reason, they equate love with loss, so they choose solitude over surrender. The tragic part is that in trying to protect their heart, they end up starving it. They keep people at arm's length, convincing themselves they're fine alone, while quietly longing for the kind of love that feels safe and freeing at the same time. What they don't realize is that love doesn't demand control, it invites trust. Real love doesn't take your power, it shares it. But for someone who spent years guarding themselves, that truth is hard to accept. So they keep pretending they're better off independent, even as their heart aches for connection. They crave love in every silent glance, in every lonely night, in every deep breath they take when no one's watching. They want to give in, to feel, to be known. But that fear of losing control keeps their hands closed, their heart guarded, and their soul waiting for a love they won't let themselves fully receive. Emotional distance is their defense mechanism, their invisible armor against the pain they once felt too deeply. For avoidance, distance is safety. It's their way of keeping emotions manageable, of keeping chaos out. When someone gets too close, they instinctively pull back, not because they don't care, but because closeness makes them feel exposed. It's like standing under a bright light when all you've ever known is the comfort of shadows. They're not avoiding people. They're avoiding the possibility of being hurt again. Every time they create space, it's not an act of cruelty. It's an act of self-preservation. They tell themselves that if they don't get too attached, they won't get disappointed. But the irony is, the distance they built to protect themselves is the very thing that leaves them lonely. They've mastered the art of staying just far enough to feel in control, but not so far that they lose connection entirely. They can laugh, share stories, even show affection, but there's always a line that no one is allowed to cross. That line is where their vulnerability lives. And the moment someone tries to step beyond it, they retreat. They might become emotionally unavailable, act cold, or even pick fights just to create separation. It's not that they stop caring, it's that caring too much feels dangerous. They're haunted by the idea that love always ends in pain, that opening their heart guarantees disappointment. So they build walls not just around their emotions, but around their entire sense of safety. Emotional distance gives them a false sense of peace. When they're alone, they don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to worry about someone misreading their silence or demanding more than they can give. But in that quiet, there's also an ache. A part of them longs to be understood, to be accepted as they are, without having to perform or pretend. Yet they fear that if someone saw their real emotions, the fears, the doubts, the fragility, they'd be rejected for it. So they continue keeping that distance, hoping it will protect them, when in reality, it only deepens the wound. They might tell themselves that they're independent, that they don't need anyone, but deep down, they know that distance is not peace. It's survival. And survival isn't living, it's merely existing. Emotional distance keeps them safe, but it also keeps them from experiencing the warmth of connection that every heart craves. They look calm, collected, untouchable, but inside, they're yearning for someone who can gently cross that distance without forcing them to tear down their walls too fast. What they truly want is not to be alone, but to be with someone who understands that their distance is a shield, not a rejection. Yet until they learn that true safety comes not from running away from emotions, but from embracing them, they'll keep building those walls higher, protecting themselves from pain and unknowingly from love too. The real pain comes when they realize they pushed away someone who genuinely cared, someone who was willing to love them through their walls. Avoidants don't usually notice this pain right away. At first, they convince themselves they did the right thing by creating space. They tell themselves it's better this way, that distance keeps things simple, that they're protecting their peace. But over time, the silence they once found comforting starts to echo. The absence becomes heavy, and the moments they used to share begin to replay in their mind. They remember the laughter, the warmth, the little gestures of care, and suddenly the walls they built don't feel like protection anymore. They feel like regret. The same space that once felt safe now feels empty. When an avoidant pushes someone away, it's rarely out of a lack of love, it's out of fear. Fear that being loved will expose the parts of them they've worked hard to hide. They think they're saving themselves from heartbreak, but what they're really doing is creating a deeper one. Because at some point they realize that the person they pushed away wasn't trying to control them or hurt them. That person was simply trying to love them. And that realization cuts deep. They start to see the moments when they could have opened up, but didn't. The times they could have said how they felt, but stayed silent instead. The more they remember, the heavier it becomes, because they understand now that love doesn't wait forever. They'll look back and see the signs, the way that person was patient, the way they tried to understand, the way they stayed even when things got hard. And they'll realize they mistook that patience for pressure. They thought that by pulling away, they were maintaining control. But in truth, they were losing something irreplaceable. That's when the regret sets in, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in quiet moments. The nights they can't sleep, the songs that suddenly feel too familiar, the random memories that hit them out of nowhere. It's in those moments they feel the weight of what they